I'm sure many of you watched the Super Bowl a few weeks ago. Is that true? Hands. Anybody watch the Super Bowl? Yeah, a fair amount. Okay. I'm surprised not more. But I can't say anything because I didn't either. So, but you picked your teams, those of you that were watching. Even those that weren't watching, you may have had a team in mind that you hoped would win, and you cheered them on, and presumably you showed good sportsmanship and didn't shout at the TV or whatever. It reminds me of a story about a young boy who was called out of the baseball game by his coach. His coach called him over and said, do you understand what cooperation is and what teamwork is all about? And the boy nodded his head, yes. And he said, well, do you understand that what really matters is not whether we win or lose, but it's the playing together. It's being a team. Yes, the boy nodded again. Good, the coach continued. And when a strike is called or you're thrown out on first, you don't argue or curse or attack the umpire with a bat or throw dirt in the opposing member's face. Do you understand that? One more time, the boy nodded his head and said, yes, well, sure, coach. That is what you taught us to do. That's what you taught us about. Well, good, said the coach. Then will you please go over and tell your mother that? Good sportsmanship. I don't think any of you take it to that level. But we do find ourselves in life being attracted by certain teams, right? Or groups or organizations that we want to be a part of with like-minded people. I mean, it's perfectly natural for us to do that. But when it comes to an us versus them, when it comes to a we're better than those guys attitude, when civility is lost, then something has terribly gone awry. And that's what Paul was talking about in the passage that Stephanie shared with us this morning. Both he and Apollos were baptizing people into the early Christian church. But rather than be excited about their common ground of understanding, being new Christians, they started arguing over who was the one that brought them in. Was it Paul or Apollos? Well, Paul brought me in, so hence that's better than you who came in the other way. And this attitude that happened among them that I'm sure left Paul shaking his head in disbelief. Here is something so good and wonderful, and yet they're taking this and being petty. It's not about any competition. They were all on the same team, all celebrating the same thing. And elsewhere we know that in Paul's letter he talks about, once again, they were arguing about who had the better gifts and talents. Those that were the teachers or those that were the prophets and so on and so forth. And he says, no. We are all one body, each with different talents that really develop and make up the whole. It's a good thing that we're not all identical. And so he says to them, I still have to talk to you like a bunch of kids because you're quarreling over some foolish things. You haven't reached that sense of what it means to be in the Spirit, to be spiritual people. To be people who live in God's love. Well, things aren't that much different today when you think about it, really. Consider the vast number of Christian denominations, each with their own spin on what it means to follow Christ's example. And to that, you can add the remarkable number of faith traditions throughout the world. Very different, and yet there is a common thread. The desire for a life of meaning and purpose. A life that yearns for love and for peace, that seeks to live on a higher plane of spiritual awareness and harmony. And yet we know that wars and hatred have come out of these differences. Oppression and submission have been justified in the name of religion. I would imagine this was nothing that Jesus envisioned when he came to walk on this earth and share the goodness of love, of God's love and what our love ought to be for one another. So rather than lifting up the negative in our differences, Jesus lifted up the common message of love, that when it is truly practiced, unites us together rather than divides us, brings harmony instead of quarrels, peace instead of focusing on our differences. There is something about human nature, I'm sure you would agree with me on this, that will always struggle to find balance and harmony when we do not choose to live from a place of deep faith and spiritual awareness. And that spiritual awareness does not worry about our differences. You see, it is concerned about what we have in common and celebrates what we have in common. When we choose to live in faith, we see things differently. And it comes down to choice, really. How we choose to live our lives in community with one another in spite of our differences. For rather than being a problem, and our differences can be a benefit in order to help us grow together. Leo Tolstoy once said, "Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself." Yet that changing within ourselves is truly what our faith is all about. And what Paul was trying to convey to these people, these new members of the early church. Faith is a heart, mind, and body matter, our entire beings. Faith requires all of who we are. It is not an entry into some club where we sign on the dotted line and we're in. But it's a deep change in here. It even takes us to the level that Richard Rohr speaks of and defines as wisdom. And he says, wisdom is a way of being whole and fully open to a knowing beyond rational thought alone. To see in such a way requires the hard work of keeping our inner spaces open, mind, heart, and body all at once. This is at the center of any authentic spirituality, he says, and it does not happen easily or without paying respectful and non-egoic attention to the moment in front of me and within me. It's a challenge to live in that place, and yet the choice to live in faith is a choice to live in spiritual awareness in all that we do. Moses talks about choices in our passage from Deuteronomy today. The Hebrew people were there standing on the threshold of their new life. They were there on the edge of the Jordan River, looking across at the new land where they were headed, a place of freedom. They had come up out of oppression in Egypt, journeyed across the desert lands for a long time, with promise and hope guiding them to that very moment. And Moses lays it out before them. He says, you have a choice as you stand here. You have a choice of life and prosperity or death and adversity. It is about where you decide to put your trust. In the ways of love and of God, or in the ways of self-centeredness and greed. The choice is yours. And he goes on and says, now let me remind you, you have reached this place because you have followed the commandments of love that have brought you here and that have been taught to you. But if you should place your trust in material things, put your hope in values other than love and justice, kindness and compassion, then it will not go well for you. There on the threshold of opportunity, he closes with, choose life, and it will then go well for you and your descendants. Choose life. Let me end with a little quiz, if I may. Now, just think of the answers in your head, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on them, but I think you'll get the point. Name 5 wealthiest people in the world. Name the last 5 Heisman Trophy winners. Name the last 6 Academy Award winners for Best Actor or Actress. Name the last decade's worth of World Series winners. Now let me ask you another set of questions. Think of a teacher who made a positive difference in your journey through school. Name some friends who have helped you through a difficult time. Name a few people who have taught you something worthwhile. Think of 2 people who have made you feel appreciated and special. I imagine that was easier, wasn't it? Those faces, images, and names come to mind. My first one was my 3rd grade teacher, who I don't know what she ever did to make herself so special to me, but I think it's because she made me feel special to her. Several years ago, I did a memorial service for a colleague, a friend of mine, a fellow board member. We were both board members of a school for troubled youth and their families in Waterford, Connecticut. And this man who came up to the podium during the memorial service was now 40 years old. But he had been a student at that school some 20 years prior. And he remembers the man we came to honor that day, Gary. He remembers Gary showing up at the school, popping into the classes and saying hello, visiting them in their residence halls, coming to the dining room and just sitting there with them and listening to their stories. And that simple act of compassion made this man, who was a child back then, feel like he was important and that he was cared about. He later finished school and he went on to start his own business, and there he was some 20 years later standing, giving thanks for a man who changed his life because this man chose to give beyond himself to him. A life that celebrates the things that really matter. Love and kindness, compassion and care. Those are the lives that we will remember. And those are the things that we will be remembered for. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "That which dominates our imaginations and our thoughts will determine our life and our character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship, for what we are worshiping, we are becoming." May we choose life, a life that celebrates and honors love for all. By doing so, we will be enriched beyond imagination. By doing so, we will become a part of the reign of love and harmony, peace and joy that our world so desperately yearns for.